I'm the president of the Global Security Institute, and this is still Ambassador Bob Gray with us today. He is the chair of the Non-Partisan Security Group. He has an enormous reservoir of experience, but more important, I know him very well, and it's the wisdom that he's gained from that experience that commends our attention to what he has to tell us. He was with the United States State Department for over 40 years. He was the U.S. ambassador to the First Committee of the United Nations. He was the U.S. ambassador to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. He was the deputy director of the Arms Control Disarmament Agency. He was the political counselor to the United States mission to the United Nations. He was the director of the State Department's Office on Advanced Technologies. He worked with the best of the United States diplomats for many years. And it's safe to say, I think, that when he was with the Arms Control Disarmament Agency, they achieved over a dozen arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament treaties. He was involved in numerous negotiations for some of the most important treaties that have stemmed the spread of weapons of mass destruction. Bob, let's start. When did you join the Department of State of the United States?
1960.
And before that, what were you up to?
I went to law school at the University of Michigan, and I went to Dartmouth before that.
So 1960 was even before the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were there in the State Department during the Vietnam War.
Actually, I was overseas, Jonathan. Oh, I was there part of the time, 64. I got back in 64, 65, I think.
Where were you stationed overseas?
I was in Norway for 2 years, and then 2 years in Burkina Faso.
In Burkina Faso. And where exactly is Burkina Faso?
It's east of Ghana.
So you were in Africa while many of these countries were moving into their own, becoming independent states. That was an issue.
That's right. We were the second wave into Ouagadougou. Yes.
So you lived in Ouagadougou.
Right. Actually, my son was born on the first aid station at the embassy.
And that was pretty challenging for a kid from New England, huh?
Well, it sure didn't look like my hometown in Shirley.
And what were the kinds of groups that you had to talk to representing the United States that you had to negotiate with? Who were the kinds of people you had to talk with then in the 1960s in Burkina Faso in Africa?
Well, mostly we were working on foreign assistance and development and all of that. And we had a big food program there, and the Catholic Relief Services ran it. And I spent a lot of time with Père Bisson, the white father from Maine. And the two of us went all through the countryside, making sure everyone got the right food.
So feeding people was the issue.
It was a big humanitarian. Mostly it was concerned with foreign assistance and that sort of thing.
You
yes.
know, I was recently studying the secret deals that were made between the Soviet Union and the United States during that period to address smallpox and polio, and that there was an enormous amount of scientific cooperation to address these diseases which were affecting everybody. But of course, in Africa at that time, there were all kinds of surrogate conflicts, and one could understand the Vietnam War to some extent as a surrogate war in the height of the Cold War. Were you at all involved in? I was deeply involved in protesting that war, and you were working in the government at that time. Were you at all involved with Vietnam?
Not at all in that particular, not in Ouagadougou, no.
No, but during your career.
We got, peripherally, when I was working for the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, we got involved peripherally in it. And subsequently, when I was in the Political Military Affairs Bureau, we were not directly involved in Vietnam. I wasn't, but I was working the program in Cambodia.
Oh, okay. So you were involved in the program in Cambodia.
Yeah.
So I like to be really candid. What was your opinion of our engagement there? And like, what was your opinion about it? Because I felt very strongly about it, and I think it was, well, I'll hold my opinion. What was your opinion?
Well, I'm on the record on this one because I was sent out to look at what we were doing with the military assistance program. And I came back and they said, you have to write a memorandum. I said, you don't want me to write this memorandum? They said, well, write it anyway. And I did, and was called into the deputy secretary's office along with a bunch of guys, and they all started remonstrating because they were terrified that Kissinger and Nixon would get all upset. And I said, well, hell, you asked me to write the memorandum. That's the one I saw. And I said, this is not going to work. Absolutely not going to work.
So, what was not going to work?
The military assistance we were giving them. Subsequently, we found out that half the petroleum we gave them, they sold to the other side. And they were hopelessly inept. Jonathan, they had 16-year-old kids practicing for the war by charging up sandbags at the country club in Phnom Penh. You just knew that this wasn't going to hack it against the best guerrilla fighters in the world.
And the guerrilla fighters were fighting to protect their homeland as they saw it from.
No, they were basically Vietnamese at the time. And we're going after the Vietnamese. What we ignored was the fact that they had a homegrown bunch that was even more virulent.
Oh, right.
And that resulted in the death of about 1 million people.
That was the Khmer Rouge.
Yes.
I was interning in Washington at that time for a congressman. And I saw a white paper that the State Department had issued talking about the South Vietnamese situation and the weapons that had been captured from the guerrillas. And I looked at the footnote to see where the weapons were from. And over 80% of them were from the United States. So I went into the congressman and I said, either we're selling them to these guys, or our so-called allies are giving them or selling them. But it appears to me that their weapons are coming from us. The report ignores this. It looks like it's a spin to me. It doesn't look honest. And the congressman looked more deeply into it and became one of the early congressmen who did not support the war and told us to come home. And I think to some extent, we're seeing some of the same folly today. Would you agree with that? The same folly of engagements where we simply can't prevail.
That's the case many times, but there are cases where we can prevail too. And by the way, this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue about what our national interests are and how to protect them. I think, to give you a bad example, going into Iraq, invading Iraq on the basis of crazy information, after we had sent inspectors over with other countries and confirmed that there were no weapons of mass destruction, there were practically no weapons at all, that was a big mistake. However, I must say that the intervention to liberate Kuwait was a masterful piece of diplomacy made possible by President Bush and by Scowcroft and by Jim Baker and by my ambassador Tom Pickering up in the Security Council. That's when diplomacy worked. We got together a coalition and we cleaned up the problem. So it's a question of doing the right thing at the right time and being a little more discerning rather than ideological. And all of these problems cannot be solved militarily. They have to be solved by diplomacy. That's how we got arms control started. If you don't talk to the other fellow who's as interested in staying alive as you are, then you're not going to make any progress. And as we look at global warming and all the other issues coming at us, this can't be done unilaterally. It has to be done through diplomacy and through negotiation and cooperatively with the rest of the world. This is not just the United States, it's a planet.
Well, right now we're living with the COVID-19 threat, which is a threat that all of these militaries don't seem to be able to protect us from. It doesn't carry a passport. It doesn't care what nation or religion or race or gender you're from. And there's a movement afoot to treat the vaccine when it comes out the way the polio vaccine was treated, which was without a patent. But the idea that we would approach the response to COVID at a purely national level, pull out of the World Health Organization, for example. It seems to me that their vision is the vision of people who want to do that is to have a vaccine apartheid world. That is as if we could live outside of the rest of the world. It's almost an example of, or an extreme example of a foolhardy approach.
Well, dealing with any major problem, you have to have a strategy and you have to implement it. And you can't change your mind every 10 minutes. And especially with the COVID problem, you can't solve it alone. It's got to be done cooperatively. And we all know that, but the incoherence in the federal government on this issue is staggering. It's colossal. I used to think that the intervention in Iraq was the biggest foreign policy disaster I'd ever seen. I'm revising my opinion. I think we're seeing another one being created that's even worse.
Let's go to an issue that you have real expertise in. Well, no, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a little bit. We'll get to nuclear issues because you have real expertise in that. But I wondered if you could give us a couple of examples that are the most pronounced successes that you observed in your career of the use of diplomacy as a tool to improve conditions.
Yes, I think I can think of a couple. The first, of course, is the whole creation of NATO and the Marshall Plan. That's set the tone for all the subsequent years, except for the present time. The behavior of the United States when the Berlin Wall came down. We didn't go out looking for bragging rights. We stood in the background and gave the Germans full credit, which they deserved, for pulling it off. We don't go around the world. We shouldn't be going around tooting our horn all the time. There are other examples, of course. We were talking about public health. When we were in Upper Volta, we vaccinated the entire country, all the children, against measles, and we had a remarkable success. Maybe too much success because the population immediately doubled in the next 20 years, but we did. It was a childhood killer. Most people that died of measles in that country were under 3 years old when we came in with that program. So those are a few examples. The World Health Organization, of course, we supported these UN agencies over the years with remarkable success. People don't realize that every year we put about $1 billion into the United States, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and their programs. Vitally important. Supporting the WHO, the International Labour Law, the World Treaty Organization, all these alliances which pull people together rather than pulling them apart are so significant to us. We cannot do it alone. We can't do it without the help of our friends. And when we can, with the cooperation of those would be our enemies.
What is the narrative of those who, for example, the current administration has pulled out of the INF treaty, which was really a treaty that our friends wanted to stop the missiles from threatening Western Europe. Pulling out of Open Skies, which obviously makes it so much safer. Pulling out of the inspection regime over Iran. Pulling out of the World Health Organization. Mocking NATO alliances. I can't figure out what does success look like to those who degrade international cooperation and law, and particularly because many of them claim to be strict constructionists of the US Constitution. And our Constitution has Article 6, Clause 2, has the Supremacy Clause, exalting treaties as the supreme law of the land. It's not just a legal description, but it has poetic resonance. It's the supreme law of the land. It's the only time the term is used in our Constitution. And people who disagree with you and I treat treaties almost as if they're negotiations in a real estate deal or something. What does success look like to them? What are they trying to achieve?
I don't know, because their definition changes every 24 hours.
Well, some of them are a little more coherent. John Bolton, for example, who I'm sure was on the opposite side of debates in the debates in Washington when you were in office. He has a coherent vision. He was instrumental in closing the Arms Control Disarmament Agency. He fought against the chemical weapons.
He's consistently coherent in his incoherence.
Aha. But what are they trying to achieve?
I don't know. All I know is that the fundamental rule in diplomacy and in politics is if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And these guys keep digging. They're trying to destroy almost every institution that we've constructed over the last 60 years. And God knows why. I don't know.
You know, that's really funny. This was not a trick question at all, Bob. I mean, I wasn't being cute. I am similarly confounded. I truly am. I'm truly confounded when you have a Republican administration starting a trade war, when for years the Republican narrative has always been free trade, spreading American values through commerce and the rule of law. And they've done everything, it seems to me, to alienate any country that might want to follow that practice.
And more importantly, when you talk about international trade, they have neutered the World Trade Organization. They can't arbitrate because they don't have enough arbitrators, and we're blocking appointing people to solve these trade disputes.
So they have
a deliberate sabotage of the institution.
Exactly. They're undermining the institutions through which global cooperation could take place. Whereas we're arguing ways of achieving fulfillment of existing legal commitments, like the legal commitment for disarmament under the NPT, which we'll get to, and utilization of the World Health Organization to respond to a pandemic. And they're not debating the substance of the issues. They're undermining the institutions through which the policies could be executed. But I can't figure out what kind of institutions they're proposing in place, other than an authoritarian, arbitrary exercise of power. It just seems to me I don't understand I understood what success looked like to Richard Nixon, for example. Right? Or Ronald Reagan. I mean, I'm a Democrat. I wasn't always a Democrat. I'm a Democrat now, and I see through that lens. So, but I've always seen on these issues, there's been a bipartisan consensus. So Richard Nixon brought us the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty came into force in his administration, the Biological Weapons Convention, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Water Act. I mean, this was, and then of course Ronald Reagan brought us the START process and the INF Treaty, and as you said, George Bush Sr. was instrumental in strengthening the international cooperation and the rule of law. Chemical Weapons Convention was negotiated under his rule. It seems to me that there was a bipartisan consensus of building cooperation and strength. but I don't understand really what I don't understand what guys like Pompeo, our Secretary of State, want to achieve.
I can't look into his mind, but he allegedly was his first class, the head of his class at West Point. I don't know what they taught him, but he seems to have forgotten most of it.
Well, because as you said, they switch positions on a regular basis.
Oh yeah.
They switch positions on a regular basis. So let's go to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is really central to the theme of the Global Security Institute's focus on nuclear weapons. You were involved in the extension of the treaty and then the review conferences subsequent. Could you talk a little bit about what that treaty promises to the world and what its premises were and are?
Well, the premise is, of course, that we don't want more proliferation and we want to stop it. And to help achieve that, the nuclear weapon states have agreed to the eventual elimination of nuclear weapons. But when you get down to brass tacks, every time you try to get the nuclear weapon states to reaffirm their commitment, they kind of renege on it. And they say, oh yeah, sometime, maybe, but they won't say we are committed to it. And the one success we had when I was working this with Noam Wolf, who was a tremendous resource for the government, we got a commitment to put on writing that we are committed to the ultimate elimination of nuclear weapons. And that took a titanic struggle. Believe me, we worked on that for a long time. But our strategy was to go in there and get that done so that we wouldn't be saddled with a whole lot of, people could pull out of the thing if we didn't recommit to that. So we recommitted to what we committed to, but it takes a hell of a lot of effort to get the government, particularly nowadays, to commit to what we've already committed to in a treaty.
Yes, I think you're referring to the first review conference of the treaty in 2000, because I remember you were part of the delegation, and that was a very important event in human history. Really, it was the first. It was testing whether the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty's indefinite extension and the disarmament commitments were to be taken seriously.
Well, we were about to break up the conference, and a lot of people were going to pull out one way or the other if we couldn't agree to something like that. I put a proposal to the leaders on the other side on that in front of the other nuclear weapons representatives, and all the rest of them said, we won't do it. Guess what? The next day they all took it. That's what American leadership is about. And so if we're not prepared to lead, other people are going to take it over, and hell knows what's going to happen.
So,
but it was us, it was our leadership that got it done. And that was under Clinton, that one.
Yes, and I think the proposal you're referring to was, because I followed it very closely as an advocate, and it was wonderful to be able to proudly come in behind the American flag. And part of the proposal that I think you're referring to was moving forward on the test ban treaty, commencing negotiations to cut off any further production of fissile materials, strengthening the IA international atomic energy safeguards, but most importantly, language that I think you're referring to, an unequivocal undertaking to obtain the elimination of nuclear weapons, to actually state it straight out unambiguously. And you got 191 countries to agree to that. And now we are seeing as if these commitments that we've made, we didn't make them. You know, it's as if we could just change our minds. How can we move? What can we do now to recover that momentum? Because the situation to me today seems to be more critical than it was then.
Well, I think it's going to, momentum. We can, obviously, we're having an election that should have, I hope, a favorable outcome. But more importantly, a lot of damage has been done. It's not going to go back to what it was 4 years ago immediately. This administration has cost us dearly in terms of our reputation abroad. It has divided the country more than I've ever seen it divided. We're in a situation probably worse than the Depression. And all of these things aren't going to go away. And the attitudes and the fear mongering that's going on is not going to go away with a new president. He's going to still have some major problems to overcome. And we can get back on the road, but it's going to be a long time before other people are going to take us seriously. And especially our allies. Without our allies, we're cooked. You know, we either lead or we get out of the way. And we can't get out of the way without seriously endangering our national sovereignty and our future. We have to be out front and leading coalitions of like-minded people. Without that, we're in real trouble.
Well, I think that one of the dynamics that helped for a successful review of or commitments to strengthen the NPT was the coalition of middle power countries.
Absolutely.
You know, countries like Sweden and Canada and Egypt and South Africa, and that middle power countries came together to bridge a maximalist demand of immediate elimination of nuclear weapons now versus the absolute intransigence of the nuclear weapon states.
No, you don't forget the Irish. They were right in there too.
That's right, of course. Well, the Irish were instrumental in creating the treaty. Could you talk a little bit about how those politics played out then and how they play out now?
Well, I've been out of the game for 20 years, so I don't know how they're playing out now, except when I read in the papers, and they're not playing out very well. But when you cooperate with people, when you try to get in with middle ground, it's good for everyone. And when we could put together the coalition to go in and liberate Kuwait, we got the Russians and the Chinese to agree to a series of resolutions in the Security Council. We built up the diplomatic pressure. When we went in militarily, after exhausting all the diplomatic alternatives, even the Syrians went in with us. So that's diplomacy. That's what you do. That's, you know, and without that, we're just barking like a rabid dog every time you change your mind, and insulting your enemies, insulting your friends, and bewildering your Congress. That's not a way to run a government.
You use the example of the, I thought the example of the role of middle power countries in being a bridge, being a stabilizing force in the world, is something we're missing right now. They're not working as a coalition. They seem to all be intimidated. And we're seeing the spread of authoritarian regimes in Russia, China, Turkey, Brazil, South Africa. This is extremely hazardous because there doesn't seem to be a discussion of how do we achieve a common good. Now, in the instance that you used as an example, with Saddam Hussein leading Iraq and invading Kuwait, there was a principle of the sovereignty of states, of not invading another state. So there was a simple and straight principle around which a coalition could be built. But what to me was most interesting was the fact that the United States did not overreach. We had the power to overreach, but there was some degree of restraint. Was there discussion? You were there. I mean, you were a political advisor to this process. I know that. You were deeply engaged in those resolutions. Was there discussion about the value of restraining our power? within the
Yes,
circles?
yes. No one told us not to, but we were very, our instructions were clear to get to exhaust every diplomatic channel we could. And obviously, middle powers are desperately important to us. And in the follow-on to these things, you can always count on the middle powers to do their best to try to modify the extremes. When we went in after the weapons of mass destruction, after the invasion of Iraq, the inspection teams were led by two Swedes, highly distinguished Swedes, and almost the entire intelligence community of the Western world poking around in every to find it. And every time we reported something, they checked it out. They had nothing in there, nothing. And the whole fabrication of the excuse to start that unnecessary and stupid war, it was not grounded on anything. The intelligence community didn't deliver on it. I mean, we had our own people in there looking and they couldn't find anything. And then they reported it. And nevertheless, in we went. It was the most useless intervention in probably American history, I think.
Well, now the whole region is up in flames as a consequence of this catastrophe.
And if you don't lead, you end up in a situation like we got into in Libya, where we go in and bomb the place and then say it's over and out, we're gone. And look at what we're looking at now. The Egyptians are squaring off against the Turks, et cetera, et cetera. The Russians are popping in, and it's complete and utter chaos. It's kind of like, when the dog bites the bus, you get stuck with it and then you walk away from it and you're in trouble. Without our leadership and without the support of our friends and coming in collectively to solve these problems, they're never going to get solved. Another example, just before the Bush senior administration went out, we willy-nilly jumped into Somalia to try to help the starving people. What we did was we upset every conceivable mechanism that the international community was using to get food to them, disrupted the food chain, raised hell for about 3 weeks, and then pulled out. And when we were negotiating in the Security Council or explaining our position, I was pulled out to go upstairs in the headquarters to talk to a whole bunch of worried guys from the Pentagon who said, when can we get out? And they were saying that before they went in. And one of them asked the question, how long would it take to stabilize that thing? I said, about 2 decades. They, whoa, we want to get out now. They were trying to pull out before they got in. The military solutions are not good solutions. They're the last possible thing you want to do. And if you don't believe me, ask the military.
Right. Apropos of the catastrophe of the Middle East and the effectiveness of the leadership of middle power diplomats, you were referring to Ralph Achaeus and Hans Blix, I presume, of Sweden. And I had the privilege of helping to arrange Dr. Blix's, some of his meetings in Washington. And I called Senator Warner from Virginia, I think he was chair of military appropriations or foreign military
Which
appropriations.
Senator Warner?
The older one.
And, okay.
Yeah. And his staffer said
not Mark, is he?
No, John Warner. And his staffer said, do you all have a brief to get this meeting, Mr. Granoff? And I said, yes, I do. It's fairly brief. It is the administration of the United States government has lied to the American people about weapons of mass destruction, and we're now burdened with a quagmire in the invasion, and it's a catastrophe. And Dr. Blix led inspections and successfully removed whatever chemical and biological weapons were still there, and nuclear weapons, particularly any nuclear program. And he told the truth to the international community and succeeded. So my brief is, would the senator like to meet with someone who has told the truth and succeeded? So she said, well, I'll find out and get back to you. So 15 minutes later, his chief of staff called me back and said, do you mind if you bring some of his colleagues? And do you mind if we meet in the formal armed services room of the Senate? I said, no, bring everybody. So we get there, and he's brought a whole bunch of other senators. Most noteworthy amongst them was Lindsey Graham, who's still an active senator from North Carolina. And Senator Graham said to Dr. Blix, well, we're involved now in a quagmire, and it's a catastrophe, and what are your recommendations to help us get out of it and help improve it? So Dr. Blix pretty much echoed what you said, Ambassador. He said, it looks to many people like a US invasion, and the only way to solve it is to use the same mechanisms that got rid of the weapons of mass destruction, the United Nations system, international cooperation, telling the truth, and working as a coalition, using the UN. And Senator Graham said, well, where I come from, the United Nations has been very much maligned. And Dr. Blix said, well, that's what leadership is for, sir. So it appears that leadership has not been forthcoming. And we had some principled leadership, I thought, with President Obama when he made this speech in Prague, calling for the peace and security of a nuclear weapons-free world. What happened to that vision that President Obama put forward? Why didn't we see more progress?
Well, I think it's due to the extreme partisanship that's been manifested, and it's been coming gradually, but now you've got a Republican Party that seems to have abandoned international participation across the board. Obama, I don't think it would be achievable for him to get a treaty or anything else through that Senate. And that's the same dilemma we have now. They're extreme nationalists and extreme, let me be honest, know-nothings running the country. It's the old know-nothing platform, keep the immigrants out, ignore the rest of the world, and the hell with it. That seems to be the prevailing attitude. And until we get our domestic policies and politics right, and a little more respect for our Constitution and the prerogatives of the Congress, we're in trouble, big trouble.
Big trouble. Big trouble, because I always think of nuclear weapons as a physics from the 1930s and a technology from the 1940s. And I know, you were involved in the Office of Advanced Technology in the State Department, so you know better than I all the gizmos and new weapons designs that sit on the horizon, like the weaponization of space. What do you think of this idea of weaponizing space that the administration is advancing?
It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. You have to have, we ought to get a deal. It's like in everyone's interest, including our potential opponents, not to go up into space with the interfering with space stuff. We are totally dependent upon it for communications, for navigation, for if you knock out these systems, I don't care whose systems they are, the risk of nuclear war becomes really, really, really close. I participated in a war game several years ago, a long time ago now, probably 10, 15 years. It starts off with a little dispute, and pretty soon at the end of a week, we can't communicate, they can't communicate. We don't know where our ships are, they don't know where their things are. And when that happens in a sea of uncertainty and in an ongoing conflict, that red button becomes a real factor. Once you shoot a nuclear weapon at someone, it's over. I don't care who shoots it at who. That's the end of civilization as we know it, because it escalates and escalates. When I was at NATO, We
What was your
always,
position? What was your position at NATO?
I was a political advisor to the Supreme Allied Commander for 3 years, and then I was the political counselor at our mission.
Okay.
But whenever we did exercises, and they were exercises, and they were not paper exercises pretty much, and communication exercises, we always stopped the war after one tactical nuclear weapon or a couple of shot at the east. Then you stop the war, because if you keep on going, there's no Europe. If people understood that the first time you use a tactical nuclear weapon in any situation, the escalation is inevitable and the approach is catastrophic. You can't win a war like that. It's impossible.
So when Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev got together in Geneva in 1985 and said a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought, you agreed with that. That seemed obvious to you by that time.
Yes. And what I never understood was, by the way, when Reagan did that, he caught the whole alliance flat-footed, because no one had ever hinted that he'd come back or he'd commit to what he almost committed at Reykjavik. But if he'd agreed not to pursue Star Wars, which is a fantasy and a phantom, we could have had a hell of a deal. And most of Europe would have been cheering, even though they were cut out of the discussions. But it's just tragic that because of this phantom fantasy that we could have a bubble around the United States that no one could penetrate, we blew it.
Yes.
Reagan didn't like nuclear weapons. And I'm sure that, I know that a lot of his military guys were aghast when he pulled that off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But he did not like them.
So you have a lot. I mean, you were the advisor to the Supreme Commander of NATO. I mean, you're so humble, Bob. I mean, I know the positions you've been in. Do you agree that we should be working for the universal, legally verifiable abolition of nuclear weapons?
Yes.
And why is it not part of shouldn't it be part of the debate for the presidency and on the program of senators today, that they've got to have policies where they take a position on this?
Well, there are so many other things out there. Yes, I think we should reconfirm our commitment to the ultimate elimination of nuclear weapons. But what's staring us right in the face, which is even as scary, or maybe more scary, is the whole question of climate change. If we don't mobilize the world and mobilize ourselves to do something about that, we're all literally going to be cooked.
Yeah, the temperatures, we're seeing this. Does the fact that the major countries are squared off with nuclear arms affect the diplomatic environment necessary to cooperate to address the climate?
I don't think there's a direct connection, Jonathan, but if you deny reality in one field, chances are you'll deny reality in another one.
Well, it's sort of like a witness in a trial, where you would say, if you lied on Monday, why should we believe that you told the truth on Tuesday?
That's
so
exactly right.
So your credibility is impaired when leaders say we don't trust the science. So how can you trust anything from such people?
Well, I spent my whole lifetime working for the United States interests around the world, but if we were to be cynical and objective at the same time, how many treaties has the United States signed that they've honored? And if you look at every treaty we made with the Native Americans, I think the score would be about 10 to 90% not adhered to. We have not got a very good record of observing treaties. And we kind of tend to forget that. Trust us, we're the good guys. A lot of people don't think we're the good guys, and a lot of people have scars to prove it.
That's true. On the other hand, in the realm of commerce and business, the trade agreements and treaties that we've made, the Berne Convention to protect intellectual property, the treaties dealing with uniformity in in how you fly an airplane into, the protocols for airplanes, all of the things that, or the arbitration treaty, the New York Convention on Arbitration, these things we really take very seriously,
Yes.
because our business community depends on them.
Exactly.
And I find it very disturbing that we do take those treaties. The public doesn't know that, but that's what allows international trade to take place.
That's what allows civilization.
It's what allows civilization.
But
we don't.
But to go back to that, let me pick up on that, because someone said the best definition of American foreign policy, I think it was Henry Steele Commager, one of the more conservative historians. He said the American diplomacy is defined by the instructions the missionaries were given by Yale when they were sent to Hawaii. Convert the natives and investigate commercial opportunities. And the Hawaiian answer to that is, when the missionaries arrived, all they had was a Bible. 100 years later, all we've got are Bibles.
Yeah. But to some extent, commerce and globalization has spread some benefits. It's a two-edged sword, I think.
It is, absolutely. We've ignored the fact that that a textile plant in the South is closed, and the replacement, after losing all the jobs here, is a bunch of people in Bangladesh working in factories that catch on fire 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's not right. If we're going to do international, we've got to have standards that people meet so that we can compete on child labor is not part of free enterprise. It shouldn't be.
So the argument of economic globalization can have within it the spreading of fundamental values and human rights.
Right.
I know that's what the International Labor Organization has been advancing, and that's what makes sense to me. And I think to some extent the Marshall Plan demonstrated an expression of our values that you referenced, that rather than crush our adversaries, we help build their economies and their political institutions of Japan and Germany.
Well, historically, if you look at the occupation of Japan and Germany, one of the things we insisted on was that labor's place at the table be respected. And even today in Germany, there are still labor representatives on the boards of all the major corporations. And that was brought in by the United States Army.
Wow. So our army was supporting labor then?
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't seem to do that now. Bob, I remember when we met with the foreign minister of Japan, with the delegation of the Middle Powers Initiative that you were so active in. I helped put that delegation together, and we had the head of the largest labor union in Japan in our meeting on our side of the table. And
that's how we got the meeting.
That's how we got the meeting, absolutely. Let's open this up to some of the Global Security Institute interns to identify yourself, and if you have any questions or comments, please, this would be a good time. Christian, could you unmute anybody raises their hand? Let me see who's here. Madeline?
Hi, yeah, I really enjoyed listening to you guys talk. I don't think I have any questions right now, but this has been super informative, and I especially enjoyed listening to you guys discuss diplomacy and effective diplomacy and ineffective diplomacy through history. I found that really engaging and interesting. So thank you for talking with us. I really appreciate it.
Where are you in school now?
Yeah, my name is Madeline Kaplan. I'm a rising senior at Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. And I'm majoring in history and Arabic studies.
And you've been studying the nuclear history of Israel, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So let's ask Ambassador Gray. When did you learn that Israel had nuclear weapons?
I can't think back that far. Sometime around 1966.
Wow. So, wow.
That's, yeah, that's early on.
That's
I
right
mean,
at the beginning.
that's what I'm doing. It seems like by 1970, everyone knew. So,
Well, Bob, you were involved in the negotiations to commit to a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East as part of the bargain for the NPT. What do you think of the prospects of that, of moving forward on that now, a nuclear weapons-free zone? Because the parties met this past year at the UN. I went to the meeting. I was invited and I went to the meeting. I was very impressed by the seriousness with which all the countries in the region took it, particularly Egypt and Iran. They seem to have, both of them seem to be pushing for progress in the subject.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I really don't. If I was an Israeli, I'd be very, 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 very careful about that one.
Well, yeah. I mean, Israel's position. I think you were at the meeting with Ambassador Issacharoff and Ambassador Hisham Badra that we had in Geneva. I think you were there, and the ambassador from Egypt said, "We have a problem because you have an unsafeguarded nuclear facility on our border. Our population asks, why can the Israelis have nuclear weapons and we can't? We really want you to, talk with everybody and make some progress and just keep the discussion going." And the Israeli ambassador said, "We have a problem because how can we talk with countries that say that they want to destroy us?"
One of the things I did in my youth, in 1967, before the Arab-Israeli war broke out, we had a control group, senior guys from CIA, State, Pentagon, you name it, trying to prevent the war from breaking out over the Straits of Tiran. And what happened. And in due course, Ambassador Rabin arrived to meet with the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. And the Undersecretary said to Rabin, all things are possible in a condition of peace. And Rabin, who has these beautiful blue eyes, looked at him and said, "They didn't tell me that in Jerusalem."
Has that changed any?
No.
Yeah.
Look what happened to him.
Yeah, and his counterpart, Sadat, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a big dilemma, but it's a part of the world that I don't think anyone's ever gotten involved in that's come out looking very good at the end of the day. And remember,
right. That would include the family of Muhammad, which was all dead within 70 years of his passing. It certainly would include Jesus. He didn't do too well with the political institutions of the day. Well, maybe you could argue that Constantine did okay.
If I'm not mistaken, his church is now a mosque.
Yes, the Hagia Sophia. That's really an insult if there ever was one. Vittorio, Christian, could you unmute Vittorio?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
I can even see you.
We can see you. Where are you? I'm
in Italy.
Okay. Tell us what you're doing in school and then please share with us.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the very interesting talk, Ambassador. I am a graduate student at Seton Hall University and I'm interning with the GSI. And I wanted to ask, with regards to US nuclear strategy, how important is it for the US to reestablish an independence agency to deal with disarmament and non-proliferation like the ACDA? Or on the contrary, does the president alone have enough power to change U.S. nuclear strategy?
I didn't catch the end of that. Can you repeat about the disarmament agency? I can talk. The rest of it, I didn't quite get.
The rest was, does the president alone have enough powers to change U.S. nuclear policy?
Does the present arrangement, is that what you, I couldn't understand it either.
No, I asked whether the president of the United States has.
Oh, does the president have the capacity?
The capacity to change U.S. nuclear strategy?
One, well, on the first part of the question, I do think it's important that disarmament and arms control be a separate entity in the government. That way you get, mostly in the State Department, you rotate in and out of assignments every 3 or 4 years, and you're available for service all around the world. But it behooves us to have a committed bunch of people who spend all their time and then their expertise on nuclear issues. So I think it was a mistake to meld the Arms Control Agency into the State Department. And the president can change that if he wishes to. Any president can create the agency, or if he can get it through Congress. And I'm pretty sure that there's a substantial number of people who now realize that it was probably a mistake to put it in the State Department. And in the last, the last 4 years, and certainly in Bush II's administration, a lot of people have been put in control of that agency who are political, with a political agenda, which is not conducive to making progress in arms control, but quite the opposite.
You were the acting director of ACTA at one time.
I'm deputy director.
Deputy director, yeah.
Oh, when my boss was sick, I was acting, yeah.
I noticed.
I didn't fall far from the tree, though.
I noticed that Kevin Davis, who used to work with you in Washington, joined our call, and I wanted to recognize him if he wanted to say anything. Kevin, are you still there? If you are, please unmute yourself. I'm looking, I saw you here a little while ago. Oh, if we lost Kevin, I feel very bad.
He's been muted.
No, I think he had. Oh, I think he had to drop out. Okay. I also see Ambassador Molnar, I believe, Laszlo Molnar, who's quite experienced in this. And I wanted to recognize Ambassador Molnar. If you'd like to make a comment, we'd like to recognize you.
Thank you, Jonathan. This is Laszlo.
We can't see you. Let us see your. Can we? I'd like to see. We only see your name.
All right. Let's see.
Just hit the thing on the bottom on the left.
I know how it works. Hi.
Yeah.
Here you see me now.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Very good to see you. And very good to see you, Bob. We met a couple of times, especially in the early 2000s. I was the chairman of the second preparatory committee meeting in Geneva, as you may recall, of the NPT review process. And,
you were the ambassador, you were the permanent representative at one time for Hungary, as I recall.
Yes, indeed. And I got engaged with the review process between 2002 and 2005. In 2002, we had the Swedish ambassador, Salander, and then I was his deputy at that point, and then he became my deputy in 2003. And in 2005, I was chairing the second main committee of the review conference. And right now, actually, I'm a professor at the NJCU, at New Jersey City University. So I was really intrigued, and I'm very glad that I could join this discussion with Ambassador Gray. And I think that our Italian student wanted to ask a question which did not come through clearly, whether the current US president is capable of changing U.S. nuclear strategy himself on his own? I think that was the question.
Okay.
So I would just like to second this question, if I may.
He's capable of anything, but I don't think he could get away with that.
You think the pushback from the Joint Chiefs would be quite vigorous if he tried to get crazy with it?
Yes, I don't think, and to say nothing about his own party or the Congress or the American people. So he'll try anything, but I don't think he's going to try to pull this one off. And if he does, he will not succeed. I'm quite confident.
That's the most reassuring thing I've heard in a long time. But as you know, Senators Warren and Markey have been trying to get and Congressman Liu have been trying to get legislation to put limits on his capacity to unilaterally call for a launch. It's clear that the sophistication of a complex foreign policy issue is beyond him. But do you have any evidence that you think the Joint Chiefs would push back? Bob?
Obviously, I haven't asked anyone, but I think that's beyond the realm of even the most. No, I don't think he'd ever try to pull that. There's no reason for him to do it now, and except sheer hypocrisy and malice. But those are sort of his trademarks. So who knows? But I don't think that's achievable or possible. I'm going to be optimistic on that one. I think the establishment in this country has enough sense to avoid that particular one.
Ambassador Molnar, coming from a more international perspective, what does it look like from your vantage point?
I don't think that I could add much more to this. Pretty much the same.
What do you think of the treaty, the so-called ban treaty, the Treaty on Prohibition, or the possibility of a comprehensive real nuclear weapons convention in the years to come?
You mean it's addressed to me now?
Yes.
I am quite pessimistic about this, unfortunately. So the odds are not really very good.
So what we're stuck with is as an American, we have a big responsibility to change the domestic political landscape for the rest of the world. That's what I'm getting from this conversation. A sense of burden of that we're really in a critical moment, that only pessimism is available in the circumstances that have to be changed.
Indeed.
Natalie Balahadra, who I think is over in London.
Hi, yes, I'm Natalie,
and we have to see you, Natalie.
I'm really sorry, my video is not going to work properly because my Wi-Fi is really poor. I've just flown back from Rome and I'm currently not at home, so I'm just going to have to keep it on audio so the connection stays.
All right.
But I want to say thank you so much for facilitating this discussion. It's been really instructive and really enlightening. And I had a question about, so I understand, Ambassador Gray, that you say that one of the most budding dilemma at the moment that we have to face together in the world is climate change. And obviously working as part of GSI, our goal is to enable a path towards complete nuclear disarmament. And I was wondering whether framing nuclear disarmament, like making the link between nuclear disarmament and environmental damage and climate change, whether that creating that link and that bridge and really emphasizing it, do you think that will strengthen and reinvigorate the nuclear disarmament regime amongst diplomats and leaders, amongst faith circles, amongst civil society? And how do you envision this going forward?
Oh, you want me to answer that?
Yes, we'd like your opinion.
Yeah, there's a linkage. There's certainly a linkage. I don't know whether it's going to have an impact. It would have a decisive impact on either subject, but I think they are basically the same issues are involved in both, survival of mankind. And I think that that's a connection that ought to be made, and as a persuasive argument can be made to do that.
Ardeth, we'll definitely get to you, but before I do that, I want to just follow on with this. We have one of the world's top experts on climate change advocacy on the call, Chip Cummins, who's sort of the creative visionary who created the American Renewable Energy Day, which is more than just a day. And I wondered if he wanted to say something about the urgency of addressing climate change and his thoughts on the relationship on these issues. Chip, would you like to join in?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for asking, and thank you for your thoughts, Ambassador. I find this to be a fascinating conversation, going back to the early days of considering assured mutual destruction. And now it seems that, particularly with the question of the last young lady from England, that we are on that path slowly with climate. You did bring up that point, and to make the analogy between climate and nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation is obvious. And I think that if we're successful in regime change on November the 3rd, and that the new administration begins to tackle this very serious issue that climate presents, and on that note, one of my dear colleagues, Tom Steyer, is taking the lead on that, along with former Secretary Kerry, in terms of what must be done, what mobilization must take place, but to also, I think that in terms of this conversation, to make that very clear analogy between what's happening with our biosphere and our atmosphere and our climate and what's been happening since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as the world stood in shock to see that kind of destructive power unleashed on the human race. And so I think that there should be language at the United Nations, Jonathan, I know you're influential over there, that does make a compare and contrast analogy, and that these two issues should be tied together at the hip. But I would posit that as a question to this esteemed group. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. Ardeth, I see your hand is up, and I want to recognize you now. Christian, could you free Ardeth's mic?
Yes, thank you so much, Jonathan. I've seen the polls of the grassroots people.
Ardeth, just tell people a little bit about yourself. I mean, you have an impressive background that people should know.
I'm Sister Ardeth Flatty. I'm a Dominican sister, and I've worked many decades regarding nuclear weapons in every capacity: direct action, political action, judicial action, and I have a passion for it. I've studied the Four Horsemen. I've studied the grassroots polls that are taken. I've studied, Blair with the ICBMs and Butler at Offutt, and, I've been to all these sites. I've done actions. I've been in prison many years.
Yeah, I wanted to say you're a person who you're a humble woman, but I want to just let people know you're a person who has brought the passion of courage into action. You've put yourself on the line. You've paid the price for your convictions. And I think you're an inspiration to a lot of people. And I just want to say that publicly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My passion went into the ICANN group, where we have now 570 groups, in 103 nations together, of young and old, etc. And, what my difficulty is, I'm asking you this question, is I cannot comprehend why the men and women of the world would not want a total ban, dispossession of nuclear weapons when they can never be used, and when they are using so much funding for it, which are needed today in the world. And thirdly, when you see the contaminants left behind in all these places at the test sites where the bombing happened, and where, you know, all of it is such a, you know, it's so open right now with the nations and the ambassadors going on record, 122-1. So the TPNW now, 6 nations away from making it a treaty in force with all of the, you know, everything that has to happen there. Why wouldn't all of the political leaders be educated by you, by all of you who are so astute and have credibility? Why would you and all of the arms control groups not be on record for the TPNW and for this treaty that could then be enforced through the ICC or the ICJ? Because you know it is criminal to use nuclear weapons. It is criminal to threaten to use nuclear weapons. So we have the morality and the legality behind us. I cannot comprehend why they have not been vocal. Every time I go to meetings with the arms control, they're not vocal that they support it. They support the getting rid of them. Now, you can't get rid of the warheads, I know, but you know, all of it's causing climate disaster. The use of oil, I study that. What the military uses in oil and gas daily. It's like, it's part of climate disaster. And I've been to the sites where, you know, the decibels go up as it relates to what we left behind at those sites. So please, Ambassador, give me some courage and encouragement that we can disarm all these weapons of mass destruction through treaty and through the work of all of the experts of the world regarding it.
Well, we have to keep trying and we have to redouble our efforts. But you make very valid points. I agree with you. If we were spending half the money that we have spent on nuclear weapons on eliminating poverty, we'd be way, 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 way ahead of the game than where we are now. Absolutely, no question about it. I was driving the other day past a big development area down here on a Sunday night, and every light in the place was on. The garage was lit up, the hotels were lit up. If you turn those off, why not? It would save a tremendous amount of, you know, we are profligate in abusing our natural resources. And if we don't go into something like energy rationing, something like that, pretty soon we're all going to be cooked.
Well, every university I go into, and I've been in many throughout the United States now, the young people are clamoring for information as it relates to the nuclear weapons. So there's something wrong as it relates to our government keeping closed what really is going on and what really is possible. And I have to count on all of you to keep on with that too, to keep on educating.
Well, I'll respond to that. I'm fully committed and totally agree that, because I don't see nuclear weapons as essentially only about nuclear weapons. They are about living up to the existing legal commitment that exists already. We don't, the ban treaty reiterates an existing legal duty unanimously held by the International Court of Justice that the nuclear weapon states must begin negotiating elimination. That's the duty that the court unanimously held. The treaty doesn't even have that. The court has already said, has directed, so that's what international law says, that they must engage in a process to obtain elimination. The treaty, the ban treaty, is one way of getting there. The problem is not a legal instrument, Ardith. The problem is political will. The problem is not that we don't, it's sort of like, you know, it's almost like this. It's almost like when I practiced law, if somebody came into my office and said, my partner's not living up to our partnership agreement, what should we do? And if my answer to him was, well, we'll do another agreement, the client would laugh at me. The problem is not a failure of legal instruments. The failure is of the public not being aware, the diplomats not being aware, not having the power to resolve it, and the political class there is a military industrial complex with lots of money and lots of resources. We don't have a commensurate peace, security, and disarmament complex with commensurate resources. Having said that, Jesus only had 12 disciples and he changed the world. Socrates, he didn't do too well with the popularity of Athens, but he brought the principle of the supremacy of the rule of law into being. And so our integrity is at issue. But I just want to go through, so it's already legally. It's morally incomprehensible to put all the future at risk. Militarily, to quote Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, they're suicidal against a state that has them. They're of no use against terrorists, and you can't use them against states that don't have them. So the only value that you have them is to prevent them from being used. So why not get rid of them? So logic would compel that. Law compels it. And then, of course, the cost is huge. But I think the moral cost of preparing thousands and thousands of young people, 19, 20-year-olds, to be able to, at an order, annihilate billions of innocent people is shocking when you think about it. That you have to take them and persuade them that this is okay. What is being done to the soul, to the psyche of those young people in Pakistan today, in India today, in North Korea today, in China, in Russia, in the United States, in France, in the UK, taking these young innocent people there to protect their countries and convincing them that they could push a button and annihilate hundreds of millions or billions of people. And then last but not least, apropos of what Chip was alluding to, Dr. Robach and Dr. Toon from Rutgers have done climate studies with these great computers and have concluded that if less than 150 of these devices were to explode, that it would throw at least 5 million tons of soot into the stratosphere, almost destroying the agricultural base of the planet, certainly civilization. There'd be some people would live, but most of us wouldn't. Be chaos, and destroy much of the ozone layer, spreading cancer, and so that we've moved in a way we now know that, and that's about the number of warheads on some of our tridents. We've now moved from mutually assured destruction to self-assured destruction. So, if we used our own arsenal first, we would be destroying Kansas. So it makes no sense. The best explanation that I've seen, Governor Jerry Brown alluded to Gregory Bateson, Margaret Mead's husband, the great psychologist, who said that we should understand nuclear weapons as totems, as like symbols of power and authority, but not actual power and authority, like superstitious symbols. And it's hard for people to give up myth. It's hard. So we have to keep plugging, Ardith. We have to keep plugging in at whatever level we can. Thank you. Well, I think, does anybody else want to say anything to Ambassador Gray? Questions for Ambassador Gray? Please go to the I think you go to the participants section and raise your hand. That's how you do it. Diane Perlman wants to join in, and then we'll close out. Okay. Diane, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I just want to
introduce you. Diane, doctor in psychology, who has become an expert in conflict prevention and resolutions principles and skills, and tries to bring the psychological knowledge that we have to the nuclear weapons issue. Is that pretty accurate, Diane?
Yeah, and I also want to say that that's one of the many areas where we bonded, because you were also interested in when you were a young
That's right.
adolescent, right? And we're old friends from Philadelphia. Okay, so just a brief comment that in addition to being unethical, immoral, and illegal, they're also irrational. And people do things that are immoral and illegal all the time. And we would all do something immoral and illegal maybe to save our kid's life. But we wouldn't do something that would get them killed. So it's, you know, also we should add to that that they're irrational. And thanks for bringing up Bateson. Also, they're symbols of domination and mastery of an attempt to master death. But so that's, I just wanted to throw that in, and thanks for this meeting.
Thank you, Diane. Ambassador Gray, would you like to have the final word?
No, Jonathan, I've used a lot of words, but I thought it was a very interesting discussion, and I hope it clarified a few things. And we live in an imperfect world, but we got to keep on plugging. And be sure to vote.
Sure, yeah, we've got to come up with, it's a big deal. I just wish that more Americans knew the accomplishments of people like yourself, Bob. I mean, I didn't go through I only just mentioned the titles, but not all the matters in which you played a positive role. You know, we know about our basketball players and our movie stars and stuff. We don't know about the successes of we know about generals. We don't know that much about the successes.
Let me make a little pitch for your interns. The State Department morale is shot. It's been underfunded, abused, kicked around, and it's at its lowest point since we had a career service. So if you want to get into a growth industry, try the Foreign Service and try to reform it. We need it desperately.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you all for joining. Goodbye.